All right, welcome everybody to another edition of the Legal Tech Week, Journalists Bloggers Roundtable, where we talk about the week's top stories in legal tech and innovation and other stuff. I am Bob Ambrogi. I write the blog Law Sites and also have the podcast Law Next, and I am moderating this panel. And our panelists today are, starting from my left, Molly.
Hi, I'm Molly McDonough. I'm a media strategist and consultant based in the Chicago area and a producer with Legal Talk Today.
Nikki.
I am Nikki Black. I am the legal technology evangelist with My Case Law Practice Management Software. I write legal tech columns for the ABA Journal, Above the Law, the New York Daily Record, and I also regularly write for the My Case blog.
Victoria Hudgens.
Hey everyone, my name is Victoria Hudgens. I'm a reporter based in Philadelphia where I write for ALM. Mostly you'll find my byline on Legal Tech News where I write about cybersecurity and how technology is impacting lawyers.
And Steve Embry.
Greetings, everybody. Steve Embry here. I write the blog Tech Law Crossroads, and I'm in Louisville, Kentucky, and a former practicing lawyer.
You finally got it right and you didn't have to practice anymore, right?
That's right. It only took, forget how many years.
All right, Zach Warren.
Hey there, everybody. I'm Zach Warren. I'm editor-in-chief of ALM's Legal Tech News, based out of Minneapolis. You'll also find me on law.com and a few other ALM brands.
And last but not least for today, Victor Lee.
Hi, everyone. Victor Lee. I am assistant managing editor for the ABA Journal. I handle the Business of Law section for the magazine. And
a couple of our usual panelists, Joe Patrice and Caroline Hill, aren't able to be here today, but we will carry on without them. So we didn't meet last week, but there's been plenty to talk about. And as seems to be a daily or weekly event these times, there are more mergers and acquisitions to talk about. But I'm going to exercise my moderator's prerogative today and just start by talking about these a couple of different acquisitions that I reported on this week at my blog and in the practice management space. And I think what was interesting about both of these is they kind of occurred stealthily. This is, we're so used, I think, to probably all of us on this panel being hounded by PR people who want to, make a big deal out of acquisitions that they're involved in or representing. Companies tend to tout this stuff very loudly. But these are a couple of instances where they happened very quietly. And one was involving practice management company, My Case. I'm not sure if we know anybody who works there, but we might know somebody who's involved with that company. But they had acquired CasePeer, which is another sort of a case management platform kind of focused on PI law, plaintiffs' lawyers, and also acquired Woodpecker, which is a legal document automation software. And I think both of these happened a little bit ago. And was finally able to confirm it this week when I called the My Case CEO and asked him about it, and he said, "Yep, these they happen." And I just thought it was interesting that they hadn't really talked a whole lot about it. And then just today, I reported on another one involving the acquisition of Tabs 3, which is, I think, kind of notable because Tabs 3 is one of the oldest practice management softwares out there in business since 1979, which is old even by my standards. And they also own Cosmolex, which they had acquired a couple of years ago, a cloud-based practice management platform. And it was interesting because the private equity firm that formerly owned them had announced the sale of Tabs 3 a couple of months ago, but never said who they sold it to. It appears from what I've been able to find out that it was in fact ProfitSolve that bought the company, and ProfitSolve is the company that last year acquired Rocket Matter and Time Solve, formed by a company called Lightyear Capital as a kind of a parent company for these various practice management companies. So it makes a very interesting combination with already having Rocket Matter and Time Solve, and now adding Tabs 3 and Cosmo Lex. And they also had already had the Lex Charge payment platform that Rocket Matter had acquired. So interesting stuff in practice management. We've been seeing a ton of practice management consolidation in recent weeks, in recent months, recent years. But I thought these two stories were particularly interesting for the stealth aspect of them, and I'm not entirely sure why that was the case.
That's my question is, what's the benefit? Is this more to give the companies time to consolidate their operations so that they're more seamless for bundled products? I mean, that's the only thing I can think of, unless they're, well, I have another idea, but I'm just curious, especially like Zach and Victor.
Well, I'm curious about Tabs 3 because as you were talking, I went back into my emails and I had heard something about them potentially getting sold a couple months ago and got no commented very quickly. So I got the impression that they in particular were looking for a partner for a while. I don't know when they finally found one, why particularly it would be stealthy, but I think from their standpoint, it kind of makes sense of we just couldn't achieve this scale on our own. So we want to plug into something larger, and something like Profit Solve is a large way to do that. But why they wouldn't make a big PR deal out of it, and specifically no comment when I did ask previously, I don't have a good answer.
Yeah, I should say I had reached out to them back, I think it was in March also, when they announced the sale, when the former PE firm announced the sale of them. And I don't think I even got a no comment. I don't think I got an answer at all. So you rate, Zach, you got a no comment. But I think from what I can tell, that happened at the time. It's not like they got sold and Profit Solve just picked them up recently. I think it all happened at one transaction. Yeah.
Well, I feel like PE companies can be, some of them want to make the big splash, like the one, like your banning companies and like your the was it the KK whatever the KKR or whatever that big one is. I didn't want to say, but then yeah, I mean like some of them I find that they like to kind of operate stealthy under the radar. Not really making a big splash or things. I don't know if it's a company thing or if it's like the regulatory issues or if there's other things that happen. But yeah, I mean, I guess maybe this had just been like a traditional M&A deal, then it'd be a little more surprising. But yeah, I mean, I think each company has their own culture and way of doing things.
Yeah, I mean, I should just note that when I did talk to Jim McGinnis, who's the CEO at my case, who said it wasn't that they were so much trying to be secretive as that they were still working on the strategies around how best to accelerate the growth of the companies that they had acquired, whatever that means.
So I just, from a marketing standpoint, it just seems like a missed opportunity to at least get the brand recognition in the media. I mean, we've talked a lot about how hard it is to get, especially older established companies, to get the word out about their products and services. So usually this is the time to do it. This is the time that there would be pickup, is when there's an acquisition, and it seems like there should be at least some type of statement available that would give them that media boost. So I was surprised. I'm just surprised by the stealthiness of it for that reason.
Yeah. I mean, I think we all know it often happens, because we'll probably get these things under embargo sometimes, that there will be an acquisition and they're going to delay 3 or 4 weeks before announcing it or something like that. That happens pretty commonly. And, I can understand wanting to kind of get your ducks in order and whatever before making an announcement. But I think that the span of time here was interesting, because, you just kind of can't sit on something like that too long without it, word coming out. I mean, people are going to pick up on the fact that it was happening. Why not get ahead of it and get the announcement out there? But so be it. All right. Any other thoughts on that before? And I think forgot to mention the Abacus Next announcement just last week too. They had picked up. What did they do? Blanking on the name. So we can talk about. We've got a couple of other stories to talk about this week. Nikki, do you want to talk about one you had picked up?
Sure. I actually wrote about it for the Daily Record, and I submitted it yesterday. I think it was published online, but it's behind a paywall. But essentially what it was that, and I will put a link from Sharon Nelson's site. She wrote about it, and that's what caught my eye. It's this idea that New York, along with a few other jurisdictions, are passing legislation that relates to ransomware. New York's is the only one. I don't know if that's going to work. New York's is the only one that applies to private companies. The others apply to state funds, but essentially what the legislation says is that when there's been a ransomware attack, it prevents the business owner from paying the ransom. New York was the only one that prevents private business owners. The other 3 states prevent state or tax funds from going towards the ransom. And the idea behind the legislation is it's going to remove some of the incentive to bring these to attack things through ransomware, because if you're not going to, if the companies are prohibited from paying the ransom, then there's no benefit to holding stuff ransom. So that's the theory behind it. But what I found to be interesting was twofold, especially New York's as it relates to private companies being prohibited from paying the ransom. First of all, it's sort of it's not a very business friendly decision, because it prevents the businesses from getting their data back. And oftentimes, it's not always their fault that they get hacked or that things are held ransom. Sometimes, businesses, even the best businesses, are sometimes going to have these loopholes because they forget the update software right away. Or there's some vulnerability that they're not aware of in the system, even with the best IT staff. So this idea that they're going to be prohibited, it's proposed legislation, but prohibited from paying the ransom really does seem to penalize businesses. And I don't know how that's going to make, maybe people aren't going to want to do business in New York anymore if there's a risk of that. But the other thing I thought was particularly interesting, and this was the angle that I took from my Daily Record article, was that it's just one more reason why you should be in the cloud. Because what ransomware does is it locks up your premises-based systems and the data that's stored on the servers located in your law firm. Or your office if you're not a legal entity, but I'm going to talk about law firms specifically. If you're in the cloud, or if you back your data up into the cloud, even though they're holding your data ransom and they've obviously gotten access to your data, which is a problem in and of itself. But if your data is backed up in the cloud, or if it's only in the cloud and they've locked your systems down, you still have access to all that data. And if none of it's on your local systems, then it also isn't in the hands of the bad actors. So it's just one more reason why lawyers should back their data up in the cloud, or just store it in the cloud with possibly redundant backups in the cloud. If you really want to have redundancy built in and not have it all with one company. But, I think we all learned from the pandemic that the cloud is the only reason anybody was able to get work done during the pandemic in terms of remote work. And with this seeming trend with ransomware, prohibiting people from paying the ransom, just get your data out of off your servers and put it somewhere in cloud servers so that way you have access to it. So I just thought it was interesting for a number of different reasons.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting too. And I would like to think that the driving force behind these legislators and coming up with these no ransomware payment statutes is to drive people to the cloud. the practical side of me thinks, no, they just really don't kind of understand the problem real well and want to equate this to like a kidnapping of a person or something. And it's really more akin to, I mean, cybersecurity and data breach is just a fact of business life. And it's, it's a cost of doing business these days because you can't completely keep your system from being breached. You can make it hard to, and you want to do all that. But so I thought that may be the impact, Nikki, and I hope that it is to drive people more to the cloud. But it did strike me as kind of, once again, sort of this misunderstanding of the kind of the problem that is behind all this.
I do kind of wonder if it's part of an overall strategy to thwart, to try to create some justifications for not paying. That I just posted in the chat that New York opened it's the first municipality to open a physical cyber attack defense center with like over 280 partners. And it's like based in a skyscraper in Lower Manhattan, and they send response teams. But kind of buried in this Wall Street Journal article is the stat from this. He's the New York Police Deputy Commissioner of Intelligence, and he said something that there's a cyber attack across the country every 14 seconds, and 40% of the companies pay, and 80% are attacked again. 80% of those are attacked again. So there's got to be some kind of incentive to not pay, or something to discourage having to pay. But interfering with the business's ability to operate seems a little extreme too.
Yeah, and it's sort of a society interest too. I mean, when you think about the breach of the pipeline business, I mean, a lot of people were thankful they paid and got the oil flowing again, right? Otherwise, they get no gas, and so it's a complicated issue. I mean, I hear what you're saying, Molly. If every business said we will never pay, it's illegal, and boom, then the market for the bad guys would dry up. You would think, or theoretically, but that probably isn't going to happen. So I don't know. It's a tough issue. I hadn't thought about that a lot.
They'd still steal the data and sell it on the black market or something, or find other ways to profit off it, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's just, I always get that, like, whenever I see these kind of things, I always think of that, oh, we don't negotiate with terrorists. We don't negotiate with terrorists. It's like, I think people have been watching too many TV shows and movies. It's like when they're like, oh, well, we're not going to negotiate, and then kind of use that as like their way of like kind of dealing from a position of strength, even though they're in a position of weakness. And just, yeah, I mean, I just think that this could open up all kinds of issues, but also it's just, look, like, it's a business's right to pay for data if they want it back, right? I mean, like, this idea that, like, that New York would just say, oh, well, you can't do this. It's like, well, what if they want to? What if the money's no big deal for them, and it's worthwhile for them to? It makes more business sense for them, and it's better for their shareholders, better for the data and the people that they, whose information could be exposed. What if it's the right thing to do ethically, business wise, and whatnot to pay for it? Then they should be allowed to do it, right? But yeah, I don't know. I guess it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, there are already disincentives in the federal law. I mean, there are the U.S. Treasury regulations or something to that effect prohibit financial institutions from facilitating ransomware payments under the Trading with the Enemies Act or whatever that is, assuming that most of these ransomware demands are coming from countries that are covered under that act. So there, any larger corporation or law firm or anything is probably already going to be facing some issues around possibly crossing federal regulations in that regard. But ultimately, I would agree with what Sharon. I think Sharon's kind of sort of concluding paragraph in her post was basically it should be a business decision by the businesses, and to decide how to deal with it and how to respond to it. And I don't really think it should be a matter of legislation at all. That's my opinion.
Kind of to Molly's point, though, I think it is interesting to think about, like, it could go one of two ways, where hopefully, kind of to Nikki's point, this means that people will think critically about where their data is stored and whether it should be in the cloud and the security controls that are around it. But I could also kind of see it going the opposite direction of people thinking, oh, well, this is a law. Well, now I just don't have to think about it. Like, I only have one particular option for me to go. So if my stuff gets hacked, well, that's just a cost of business. I don't have to think about it too much more and make a business decision about whether to pay this or not. It just kind of is what it is. I would hope that businesses are smarter than that, but I'm not necessarily sure that a lot are.
Well, and what about when that business is a law firm and what's gotten hacked is client data, and that client data, can reveal highly sensitive deals or personal information or whatever else. That's a really tough call for a law firm. When those when those ransomware attackers start posting that stuff up in the dark web, and suddenly your client documents are being made available for anybody to see. Even if there's a law, you've got to really weigh protecting your clients versus the risk of perhaps crossing some law. I don't know. That's not a good choice.
That's a tough one, yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it might stop some people from acting if they know they're not going to get paid. But some people are going to do this for free. Some people are just doing this because
Right.
they want to show they can do it, or they want to, sow dissension and chaos, and it doesn't even count for state actors too. So yeah, I mean, it might stop some people, but it's I mean, you're never going to stop all people from doing it.
Yeah, think
Yeah,
back
and
to the Panama Papers sort of deal, where that wasn't ransomware at all. It was just, hey, this is a law firm that serves a lot of celebrities. Wouldn't it be interesting to see what they're talking about and release some of that info? Like, these cyber attacks aren't going to be going away anytime soon.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing I was thinking about is it strikes me that it's never a good idea to put a business in a position to knowingly and intentionally decide to break the law to pay a ransom that they're not supposed to pay in order to stay in business, right? Because some of these people, particularly a smaller business or even a larger business, they can't get their data, they can't sell their products, they could go down really quick. And so you're going to force them now to break the law to stay in business. That doesn't strike me as a good solution.
Yeah. Just want to also point out Chris's comment in the comments, because it's very important to make the point that simply putting your data in the cloud doesn't immunize it from a ransomware attack. It's going to depend what kind of cloud it's in, and how you're storing it there, and how you're backing up or synchronizing the data, and so you have to be really careful about that. When we were talking about mergers and acquisitions, I meant to then segue over to Zach, because he had one to talk about too, but then I forgot. So Zach, you want to talk about the one you have?
No, it's no problem. Yeah, there were a couple in e-discovery that happened this week too. The first one was iPro acquiring Zylab, and Zylab has been around for a long time. It's Amsterdam based, which is a little bit unique for an e-discovery company. They're known very heavily for their data analytics. They have an analytics team that goes back years and is very well known, also for their legal hold software. And then there was another yesterday where Lighthouse acquired H5 for a lot of their technological capabilities. And I thought, especially kind of back to back, it was really interesting to see just kind of the expansion outside of normal e-discovery litigation that a lot of these companies are taking. Like, that's something that we've talked about before, and I think it's going to only continue. But both of these were a very stark example of iPro told me explicitly, yeah, we're trying to go left in the EDRM. We want to get into the information governance, into the data analytics space, because that's what our clients, and especially corporate clients, are looking for increasingly. And with Lighthouse and H5, Victoria can speak more to that one because she wrote the article for us, but they were saying a lot of the same thing, where as we're looking to move into the corporate market and not just litigators and discovery, we're looking for more of those tech capabilities in what we're doing, and kind of expanding beyond just our normal like document review, what have you, in what we're doing. So I think you're only going to continue to see that from the e-discovery community, which was already doing a lot of, or having a lot of consolidation before, but I think they're going to start snapping up companies that are adjacent, but not necessarily pure e-discovery itself.
Yeah. Yeah, Victoria, do you want to mention that? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. When I was speaking to Lighthouse and H5 yesterday, they were definitely, Lighthouse was saying like they were already in the corporate legal department. Um, that was already their main client base, but they said like they've seen a shift and like they're embracing the cloud and they want to digitize their services and they're leaning less on linear manual review. And they want to have the technology, and Lighthouse wanted to have that technology to power that kind of like, okay, you guys actually want to start using technology to dive deeper into your data. They wanted to acquire a company to spearhead that. So I thought it was interesting to see, especially, and I said, oh, is it because of COVID-19? They said, no, this was going on prior than that, but just kind of like H5 they had been in talks with, and they just kind of said now was the time was like, okay, we'll make this acquisition to kind of like be in charge of that leadership. And it is interesting what Zach was saying, like we're starting to see e-discovery companies, like they're maturing, they're trying to jockey up to make sure like they're the go-to company, e-discovery provider, and they're saying we have to focus a little bit more on the left side of EDRM. So I think it's interesting, and just kind of like as their client base is maturing and their needs are kind of changing, you're seeing e-discovery companies either saying we don't have the scale to get to that level, or they're saying we'll acquire our peers to get to that level. So it's interesting.
Also, we're also seeing kind of the marriage in these mergers. We're seeing a little bit of the marriage of services and technology. I think in the early days of e-discovery, they were much more kind of one or the other. You were either a services provider, and then you would use some third-party companies' technology, or maybe several third-party companies' technology, or you're a tech company, and you might have some sort of limited services around, using some of your tools, but then you'd have outside partners for more extensive consulting work. And both of these mergers kind of suggest bringing more of that together under one roof.
Definitely with Lighthouse, like he was emphasizing, like they didn't have that many, it sounds like, much when it came to consulting, and bringing on H5, and they mentioned like linguistics and processes that'll really help them, even though they're saying, oh, our clients want a little bit less, more manual review, but bringing on those experts, it sounds like that's something that they're really looking for. Like this is really bolstering their abilities when it comes to consulting. So that's interesting. Like, of course, like we're getting more tech savvy, but we also need those experts to provide like their expertise and to kind of hold the hands of our clients to help them get what they need done. So that was interesting.
Yeah. Victoria, while we're talking to you, you had another interesting story this week on fewer support staff people.
Yeah, this was based off of Big Hands, the workflow automation tech provider. They released a survey of a little bit under 1,000 law firms in North America, UK, and Asia Pacific, where they asked them about their support staff. And kind of like unsurprising, given like what we talked about over the past year, that law firms let go of some of their support staff during the pandemic, which wasn't really surprising, but I kind of thought it was notable that they said, not too surprising because Big Hand is a workflow provider. They said, oh, law firms are turning to workflow technology to better manage the support staff that they do have, or that they're outsourcing, to have a better like understanding of like their processes and everything like that. And they also mentioned that more law firms are turning to outsourcing as well, which is another trend that we've seen like even maybe decades back in the early 2000s, started to see that. But one of the stats that stuck out to me was that they said that it was hard for the law firms that did have staff supporting jobs to actually fill those jobs. And they said people are retiring, high attrition rates, and the people that they do find, they don't have the skills that they need. So I thought that was interesting, and just kind of like, how will law firms deal with that? And I kind of wonder, do these outsourcing vendors that provide law firm staffers, are they also seeing some people saying like, hey, I'll do this job for a couple of years, but I'm not staying long? Like, is that an issue if you have high attrition? It's just kind of like, that'll be interesting to see, like if the legal industry has to deal with that when it comes to like their support staff, who probably isn't the most paid. So they maybe have a little bit less incentive to kind of like, oh, I can work my way up, especially if you see the trends where like these roles are going away. You still need them, but they're kind of going away. So that'll be interesting to see. And I thought that was just kind of like interesting tidbits. Like you hear about the skill gaps and the needs, and just like it's also getting out to the support staff according to the survey.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question about this. This is all expected based on what we've all been talking about. But I'm wondering if there's, like you were just saying, there's going to be another shift in the other direction, and it's going to be hard to fill the positions. We're seeing more and more of these mental health studies come out about just the pressures of the pandemic. Everybody, all this support staff was let go because the firms thought they didn't need it, but now everybody's, overwhelmed, overburdened, doing everything on their own is too much. So even if you add the technology, there's got to be a correction somewhere with bringing back support staff. So I'm just, I'm just wondering where you think that balance might be, or if anybody has any thoughts about that. I think there's going to have to be a correction here, back in favor of adding back in support staff, and it will be a shame if they've lost all of this talent that, like you were saying, Victoria, that has all this institutional knowledge and understanding of the industry.
Yeah, the institutional knowledge, just because people are retiring, like how you're going to lose that and just kind of like bring on people. But if you have people kind of leaving early, and they mentioned the Big Hand representative that I spoke to, he mentioned that more law firms are considering hybrid work arrangements, not just for the lawyers, which I still thought like, oh, lawyers, you're just going to do that for lawyers. But he said, no, to actually incentivize like the hiring of support staff. They kind of say like, hey, you can have this flexibility. But I kind of wonder, like, you maybe need a little bit more. I don't know how they're going to address that, but it is interesting what you mentioned about the mental health issues and lawyers taking on more administrative tasks. In the study, they cited that law firms, I think across the board, they said they had more lawyers, doing more administrative tasks and focusing on non-billable matters. And that's just kind of like law firms don't want lawyers to do work that they can't charge for. So it's definitely like, and Big Hand, of course, was saying like, oh, that's why they'll put in workflow management tools, better manage everything. It's just like, okay, that, and just maybe like it has to change in some way. And I think being more efficient, and that doesn't mean you get rid of course, all of your support staff, but I guess maybe tasking them with work and how you delegate it to everyone. That'll be really important. But I like to hear everybody else's point.
So, but it's sort of,
Sorry,
go ahead, Victor. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. I think also, there's a cultural element too. Firms are always so big about their law firm culture, and at every office I've ever worked at, it's always like the secretaries or like the support staff or the the crew that they know everybody, they know all the secrets, they know where all the bodies are buried, they know all this stuff. They're the ones who are really sort of like the gatekeepers of that culture in a big sense. It's not always just the partners or the the money makers or that stuff. So. I think there's also that aspect of it too, where it's like, you can outsource all this stuff all you want, and you can, bring in all these processes and whatnot, but it's not going to replace sort of like the institutional knowledge and culture that's built up over the years, like with the people that they've had.
So a lot of it depends kind of on what lawyers have gotten used to. And Bob, you probably remember, years ago, there might be 2 secretaries for one lawyer, because that particular lawyer was so busy and throughout
not in any firm I ever worked in, Steve. I didn't work at those big high-powered firms.
Well, but as time went on, and lawyers themselves could begin to do more and more without any loss of efficiency and time, and technology got better and more usable, it would be very rare to see a 1-to-2 ratio now. And I think the correction that we're going to see as a result of the pandemic and lawyers doing more on their own is, recognizing that they will do more on their own. And yes, there's a place for the support staff to come back, but I don't think that they will come back in the same amount as they were before, which is a shame, because those are the people that need the work the most. But
yeah. I think even a 1-to-1 ratio is starting to get rare.
It's very
tools
rare,
like Big Hand are all about kind of managing the flow of work within a firm so that somebody's not sitting idle while somebody else has got piles of stuff to have to tackle.
Yeah, I saw it go from 1-to-1, one lawyer, one secretary. By the time I left the practice, it was 1-to-4, 1-to-5.
Yeah.
But the technology enabled that a lot too. So it wasn't totally lawyers doing everything on their own. The admins could do more and take on more just as well.
The other thing, I think, going back to the institutional knowledge aspect, especially with litigators, is that not only are there, court rules and requirements that are across a particular level of court, if you will, or particular county, the judges have their own quirks and rules, and the only people that really know them are those, seasoned secretaries. Like, there were certain secretaries that they were the only ones that knew the appeals process for a specific type of court, including all these weird quirks, and they knew the clerks and they knew what you had to do, and just there are all these like strange things. And when you didn't have them around to file this appeal, it took so much time trying to figure out how to do it. And you can't just learn. I mean, you can just learn that, but it takes time, and there's a learning curve, and it's very painful when you bring in a new secretary or support staff to do that. And I think a lot of people, I mean, there's all these stories about boomers that have just retired across the board because of the pandemic. And I have no doubt that many of them were a lot of the legal secretaries that were those, is the word stalwarts in like these firms that have been around for like 40 years. I'm sure they retired, and they have an incredible amount of institutional knowledge, and it's difficult to replace that for sure, even with big hand or anything like that.
And it was such a help to young lawyers, because I can remember as a young lawyer that, one of the secretaries would come in and she'd bring my memo back, and she'd say, Mr. Smith really doesn't like blah, 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 blah. And I would never have known that, but for her, And the other thing I think was interesting, I was going to follow up on what you said, is when I first started trying cases, I remember a senior partner told me, he said, "Who is the most important person for you to get to know in the courtroom?" And I said, "Oh, I guess it's the judge."
Clerk,
it's
right?
the clerk and the bailiff, because if they will tell you all the secrets,
right?
and how to do things.
And if they don't like you, they won't call your case.
That's right.
Or they won't
Exactly
tell
right.
you some little thing that you need to know about what just happened on another case that might help your case. Like,
Yep.
yeah,
Or where to sit, when to stand,
right.
all those kind of little unwritten rules that each court has.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Victor, you got a story this week that brings back He Who Shall Not Be Named.
Well, yeah, I mean, I know in the grand scheme of things, it probably doesn't really matter. It's a fundraising ploy for him. It's a distraction, blah, blah, blah. But I do think it raises interesting issues as far as like what Twitter and Facebook are and the role that they play in our general discourse. Of course, none of that's in the complaint. It's all about him and what he wants to be able to say, on social media or be on social media, I guess, because whenever they try to like launch their own social media networks, doesn't go well. But yeah, this idea that Facebook and Twitter are actually like quasi-state actors that
we're talking about Trump, in case anybody didn't catch.
Trump sued Facebook and Twitter saying that
not Voldemort.
They threw him off.
Literally about to make a Voldemort reference.
Yeah. Well, actually, I had a flashback to Billy Idol's Cyberpunk album, because in that album, it's a concept album that he released that totally destroyed his career, but it talked about how corporations have become more powerful than government, and how the only currency in the future is data. And I was just like, damn, did Billy Idol just accurately produce? He released his album in 1993. I'm like, did Billy Idol just accurately predict what was going to happen in 2020? But that's another story. I don't think Donald Trump was listening to that album when he drew up this complaint, but maybe he was. But yeah, I thought there were potentially some very interesting issues about the reach of these social media networks and sort of what their responsibilities are. But of course, none of that was actually in the complaint. So, but yeah, I mean, I think just on the whole, it kind of ties into this whole sort of debate over like what social media companies, what their responsibilities are, like how much power they have. Are they too big? Should they be regulated? Should they be allowed to just do what they want as private companies? I think it does tie into like the larger debate over their roles and their responsibilities. But this complaint obviously was more about him and his wants and desires.
Yeah, I mean, the article that you talked about says the case doesn't have a chance because the First Amendment doesn't apply to private corporations, but you got to wonder at some point whether that's been litigated a few times, and you have to start to wonder at some point, at what point does a private corporation so control the public debate that does become a First Amendment issue. I mean, it has to be the government. The First Amendment requires the government to be involved, and that's not happening here. But still there are interesting issues raised.
Although I mean, it's also interesting that by the very nature of filing the complaint and getting the publicity, it would sort of counter what you've just said. Just think, well, Facebook and Twitter control everything, and yet you can have somebody announce that they're going to file a lawsuit, and it's reported in every major public outlet everywhere, and just gets just as much publicity. So.
Right.
Right, before we go on, I'm just noticing your shirt, Steve. What is going on there? Like, what is on your shirt? What is that all about?
It's kind of a long story, but when I started the blog, I was looking for some catchy kind of phrase or something. And so I was out in Las Vegas, and, I saw somebody had this shirt that said "No bullshit" on it. It was some company or something. I said, well, that's really cool. So I had the shirt, and a friend of mine saw it, and she said, that's a really cool shirt. I said, oh, you think so? And then she said, well, you ought to make that applicable to your business and get some of those t-shirts made up. You could distribute it and get some publicity. So that's why.
I didn't notice what it said.
And if you go to my blog, there's a picture on there of me and Kevin O'Keefe, and I've got the shirt on, and he's talking to me with a quizzical look on his face.
So I'm not the only one that was like, huh.
Hey, if anybody wants one, I still have plenty in inventory, let me tell you.
Sign us all up. We'll have a whole no bullshit edition of Legal Tech Week.
There you go.
We try to have that every week, but we'll try. So Steve,
yeah,
you had a story this week, or did you have a story this week?
I
You were going to
did.
talk about a story this week. I don't know if you wrote about it or not, or
I did write about it. It's the Lexus Nexus Enterprise Legal Management Trends Report that came out, which is a mouthful, but it was basically a survey of billing and billing rates and alternative fee arrangements and their use and all that sort of thing. And it was some stats in there that I was frankly pretty surprised about. One of them was in 2020, the average rate increase that law firms, or at least the law firms they studied, charged to their clients was up 3.5%, increased over the year before. And the year before it was up 3.3%. So lawyers are clearly raising their rates, despite all this sort of stuff that you hear about clients being so cost conscious and all that. And in some of the areas, the rates were even raised a lot more than that. Regulatory work was up 4.1%, corporate up 4%. And I mean, it looks pretty much like business as usual. And when you combine that with the reports, at least with the AmLaw 100, of revenues and profits being pretty robust last year, it looks like law firms are really doing well. And, to me, it's a couple of interesting things that kind of flow out of that is, when you talk about innovation and adoption of technology and automation and more efficiency, here we are in the face of law firms going, well, what's the old saying? It's hard to tell a room full of millionaires that their business model is wrong. And this would kind of seem to be proof of that. And I wonder, if there's going to be a sort of a chilling effect that we're going to see as a result of this. And certainly you could say, well, clients are going to accept higher rates in exchange for greater efficiency, but that I'm not sure that that's the case, since we are seeing increased revenue, increased profits. It's hard to compare all that with each other, but I thought the whole thing was interesting. And then the other piece that was interesting was the continued increase in alternative fee arrangements. And it's gotten particularly strong in a couple of areas. Generally speaking, is about 15% of the work they reported was being done or billed with an alternative fee arrangement. But in labor and employment matters and insurance matters, which are probably insurance defense matters, it was close to 25%, which is a pretty big number. And there are reasons for that, of course. I mean, labor and employment are fairly predictable matters. You sort of know what's going to happen in most of those cases and you gauge for it. And on the insurance side, I mean, there's so much data that insurance companies have in order to gauge the effectiveness of an AFA that they can do that pretty efficiently. But I wonder if at some point we're going to get to the day where for insurance defense it could be 75, 85, 90% of the work even will be done with AFAs, and that would have a fundamental change in the way of how lawyers practice those cases. I think I know it did for me when I did an alternative fee arrangement in the late 90s. It changed the way that I looked at cases and how to handle them and what needed to be done or didn't need to be done. So the whole piece was the survey was a lot of good interesting facts in there that we see how they all play out over the coming months and years.
It's interesting. I wonder how much of those changes in billing rates were either already introduced or already in the works prior to the onset of the pandemic. Did it talk about that at all?
It did not, although they did talk about factoring in the impact of the pandemic. But even if, it's an interesting point you make, Bob, because yes, that could be true on the one hand. On the other hand, you could see businesses saying, look, I know we agreed to a rate increase, but now this pandemic has hit the fan. We don't know what's going to happen. We got to back off that agreement. We can't pay you. But there's no indication that exactly happened. And I guess it's funny to me because as a practicing lawyer, I used to do work for a very large corporation, and I won't tell you who it is, I don't want to name them, but that their general counsel every year would complain, law firms, they're the only vendor that we have that just automatically asks for a price increase every year. Don't even try to justify it. Everybody else tries to reduce what they're charging us, blah, blah, blah. Yet every single year they accepted the rate increase.
Right.
So go figure,
Yeah. It also, I just wonder, there's a lot of sort of conflicting data over the impact of the past year on law firms. Just a couple of weeks ago, I wrote about the Wolters Kluwer Future Ready Lawyer report that came out, and they had, I don't think they had any data in there on billing rates, but they did have data on whether business was up or down for law firms. And they had found that only 30% of law firms saw an increase in their business during 2020, and that in fact 40% of law firms saw their business drop down. So that doesn't necessarily tie to rates, perhaps, but certainly it wasn't a great year for everyone across the board. Right. And
I think that's right. And the size of the firm, I think, has a lot to do. One of the statistics from the Lexus Nexus report was that 49% of all the fees that were paid in 2020 were paid to the 50 largest law firms.
Yeah.
Which in some respects, you could say, well, the rich are just getting richer and the poor,
right.
The less rich are getting less rich, maybe is the way to put it. But I think kind of what we're seeing is, when you talk about the legal marketplace, we're really talking about a whole bunch of different businesses with a lot of different business characteristics. An AmLaw 50 firm has got a totally different price structure, business model, apart from generic business billable hours, but they view the business a whole lot differently than a AmLaw 201 firm that has a completely set of problems. And it really gets interesting when you start talking about the billable hour firms versus the contingency fee law firms. That is a completely different business model. There's no sense talking about them in the same sentence or same concept, really, because it's like they're just different, and how they view the world is different.
Yeah, and like practice areas of firms, when you get into the smaller firms, their practice areas can absolutely control everything from billing to client intake. And it really is, one firm can be so different from the other from start to finish of a case. So it is very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, we kind of saw kind of heading out of the recession from 2009, that you saw sort of this kind of separation of your AmLaw 50 firms, maybe even fewer than that, whereas companies would still give their big ticket, bet the company, really important stuff to them. But then when it came to their smaller, less important, and also maybe not as high stakes stuff. They would look for smaller firms, maybe some of the more regional firms, some of your like lower tier second 100 firms and whatnot. And so it was the firms in the middle, like those in the lower half of the MLAW 100, and those in like maybe like the upper half of the second 100. Those are the firms that are getting squeezed. And it'll be interesting to see if that plays out this time too, if that's more of the same. But I also kind of wonder if we haven't really seen the real impact of COVID yet. I mean, I almost wonder if because we've seen a lot of these surveys that show that, okay, things weren't so bad. Like, the work was still pretty much, it wasn't, it might have been down in some parts, but it increased in other parts. And, if a firm was smart in the way it diversified, it actually made money and it did well. And if they collected things on time, then they ended up with like pretty banner years. But I almost wonder if a lot of that was just because, we haven't really seen the full impact of COVID yet. I mean, maybe, some of the governmental programs that were instituted, some of the moratoriums, some of the, various things that were kind of put in place, kind of delayed sort of the onset of some of the, because I mean, everyone thought, oh, well, bankruptcy is going to explode, and it didn't. So, well, maybe it's coming, maybe once the eviction moratorium comes up, maybe all these housing issues and landlord tenant stuff, maybe that's going to explode. So I don't know. I almost kind of wonder if we're sort of, putting a little too, kind of maybe putting a too fine spin on things with regards to how things were this past year. But who knows? Maybe that won't happen.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. And, the other piece, of course, is, with the litigators, that their pipeline was in many ways shut off as of February, March of last year. And now many of those people, they're panicking because all of a sudden this huge pig in the boa constrictors starting to move. And, they got 6 trials set and, 25 depositions and 17 trips, and they're scrambling, trying to figure out how in the world are we going to get all this accomplished. And so what's the impact of that is, the supply and demand curve would perhaps suggest that maybe their rates will move up because there'll be so much in demand. Who knows? But you're right, Victor. I mean, I don't think we will know the full impact of this for a long time.
Pig in the boa constrictor is the metaphor of the day for this conversation. I like that. Molly, you didn't have anything this week, right? Or did you have anything you want to talk about?
I threw in the Wall Street Journal piece on the Cyber
That
Defense
we
Center.
mentioned before. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else you want to add on?
No, I was trying to, my question for Steve, really, I'm going to look for this and bring it up another time, but I was looking through Bill Henderson's research because he has a chart somewhere about showing the rise in costs, but the decrease in collections, or the rise in billing rates and decrease in collections. And he talks about that in one piece. And I'm just having trouble putting my fingers on it. So I want to look at that and compare it to some of that data with the rising
That's a good point.
billing.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Anybody have any good of the order before we wrap up today? Anything else anybody wants to talk about? All right, then we will be back next week with more mergers and acquisitions, no doubt, and other news from the world of legal tech and innovation. Thanks to everybody for tuning in today, and hope to see you back next week.